Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Good. And I'm hoping that our opposition, those people who are trying to destroy our country, I hope they're not doing as well.
Yeah,
because they're running into a little trouble, and we want to talk about that. You know, the competition among groups. Is it only one group and they're getting along very well, or are they overstepping their bounds and they're getting into trouble, which they should, because they don't have a very good program lined out for us. But you know, there's this whole idea that maybe the whole thing of the rioting is going to backfire. Of course, we hope so, but they have a lot of support, you know, because it's related to race, and this is, and nobody can be against it. The big corporations aren't really fighting it, even the ones who are being punished by this, and they're just getting by on this. At the same time, we have to contest. They have to contest with, you know, the coronavirus, because now everybody's out there demonstrating against the killing, the evil killing of that one individual. But the rioting and the killing that's going on out there, quite frankly, is probably not related. I think the police overreaction to killing a person, this is an excuse, and they wait for these things, and there's no doubt about it. I think everybody in the country has said it 1,000 times. How could anybody endorse that? But how could anybody make use of it, the political use of it? And that's what they've done. They've made political use of this. But the interesting thing is what has it done, you know, to the lockdowns? The lockdown was running out of steam already. Yeah. You know, even the people who supported it, you know, the governor of Michigan, she had to back down. Yeah. Kamala Harris, she's had to back down because she looked like a jerk. Yeah. And it's fizzling out. And we've talked about they better hurry up with the vaccine and the medication, because the crisis is going to go away.
The virus is dying.
So they have this. But the way I see the bigger picture of this is the big event is really back to the finances, excessive government spending, and then we're having this super ridiculous monetary system. Don't worry about it. Just print the money, and and prosperity will last forever. And then we see the bust, and it was significant, but it was they had to get it off the agenda. People shouldn't be thinking about it, so they did what they always do. Print money, and print it like they've never done before. You know, we just saw 1 week where they created $3 trillion. Anyway, they did a good job. They got that off the issue, and people, even though there's a lot of pain out there, but if a lot of people look for reassurances in the world financial market, they look at the stock market. So they've been able to buy up the stocks. They do buy up the stocks, and they prop it up with all this credit. But at the same time, they knew they needed something else. Of course, they went to coronavirus, and this was a good thing. And they captured, you know, a lot of people. And from the very beginning, I believe we took a position. It's all a hoax, especially the reaction to it was overreaction. And people are starting to wake up to this because it's just fading away. And I think they got prepared now, and they saw an opening with this horrendous case of this man getting killed, and said, well, maybe we can make good use of that. This is a racial thing, and nobody can, you know, stand up against that, because, you know, that is the worst thing you could be called. And I think, but my premise is, the more somebody shouts racism at somebody else, the more likely they are the racist. I think that is the case. But this has been going on. So there's this little conflict, and we found a neat little article here on Target Liberty today. Bob Wenzel, white supremacy is a lethal public health issue, and he talks about this in We Will. But there was one sentence that he highlighted to make the point of what's going on right now. So he introduced this quote that he used from the letter written by 1,200 medical people, you know, the fake medical people. And he started, the COVID-19 threat is completely political, as most clearly evidenced by this sentence in this letter put out by the the medical expert. This should not be confused with permissive stance to all gatherings, particularly protests against stay-at-home order. So yes, they want to justify all this rioting because it's moral and high-minded. It's so important, but don't for a minute think that that this is we're permitting the people, to talk about the things that they'd like to talk about in getting rid of the lockdown. And the whole thing is the lockdown is disappearing. Not because the rules are changing, because everybody's realizing there's not a big deal on this, and it's disappearing, and so that won't be stopped. But in the meantime, we have to concentrate on the riots and put that on the high moral ground, and have everybody feel good because they know that they're on the side of righteousness.
Yeah, and this just points out the hypocrisy, I guess, is the only word you can put it. And thanks to Bob for finding this and putting it up. But as you say, it's an open letter signed by 1,288 doctors, but also healthcare specialists and infectious disease specialists from major U.S. universities. The basic thrust of the letter is, hey, we're all for the lockdowns over COVID, but this other stuff has come up and it takes precedent over. Here's another quote, Dr. Paul, because it's so worth reading from this letter they put out. Staying at home, social distancing, and public masking are effective at minimizing the spread of COVID-19. To the extent possible, we support the application of these public health best practices during demonstrations that call attention to the pervasive lethal force of white supremacy. However, as public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to the national public health and to the threatened health specifically of black people in the United States. So basically what they're saying is that this virus is political, and all of a sudden you don't have to go out and you don't have to stay at home anymore because you're protesting something that's a morally just cause, So it's all political. And so the question arises, either they've been lying all along that this is a deadly virus and if you go out you're going to kill yourself or others, either they're lying then or they're lying now. If they're lying now, then they actually do want black people to die, because if you die by going out and catching this disease, and they're encouraging black people to go out and protest, they're actually wanting these people to die, encouraging them.
It's sad, but over the years, I have moved in a direction, because there was a time in my life that I thought governments were pretty straightforward and it told us the truth. But unfortunately now, or fortunately, maybe this is good that I'm looking at it differently, is that anytime somebody in government makes an announcement, whether they're a candidate or somebody in office, they make an announcement, I always assume it's probably a lie unless we can prove they're telling the truth. It's probably all fake, and I think that's what goes on. But this whole thing that where they say, yes, you can quit social distancing and use your masks and things. We don't want you to quit, but we have to get you out on the street to protest this because this is of a higher order. And to me, it suggests, I don't know whether this fits or not, but it looks like they want their cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
They want to criticize at the same time. They don't want to give up what they already have, but I don't think they're going to have a choice. I think the people are just going to flat out quit, and they have. It's getting better. And so we mentioned it once, the one I guess it was a restaurant or a bar or something. No, nobody's permitted with a mask. That sort of tells the sentiment. The other thing that demonstrates the sentiment is shifting, and this has been a month ago, is when they announced that a cruise liner, was opening up, they had double booking.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't said all of a sudden that it's the end of the world. So what the tragedy there is, yes, they may give us a little bit back, but they're going to always retain, and that's why we have feared this. Things didn't, after 9/11, things were very, very bad for several weeks, but they never gave up on the Patriot Act to keep that, and they've never given up on TSA. So this is what's going to happen. They will be back off. Things will get better, but there's going to be a lot of back and forth on this, and hopefully we can guide this in the direction of more freedom, not more tyranny and riots.
Well, there are other people than these doctors who are showing their political nature when it comes to the COVID and versus the protests/riots. And one of the worst guys out there, he's got to be one of the worst. Even Cuomo thinks he's bad, is Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. The guy is a hypocrite par excellence. And he's a guy who, as you know, shut down the place tighter than a drum. Nobody can go out. Nobody can do anything. Let's put up that next quote. Here's de Blasio now saying, well, you know what? It's okay, even though you can ignore the shutdown because demonstrating against, quote, 400 years of American racism is far more important than saving your lives. And the other thing that he said, though, is you can go out and demonstrate against this racism, but you can't go to church. You can all gather, thousands of you together on the street to protest this, but the churches are still closed. He hates religion. And to show the next one, though, here's his own daughter. He's proud of his own daughter for violating the stay-at-home orders. She went ahead and got herself arrested. His own daughter, she was arrested Saturday night in New York City with approximately 100 other demonstrators who were blocking the road and throwing unknown objects in the direction of the police. The mayor's own daughter participating in throwing things at the police, and he says, I'm awfully proud of her.
But don't you think the conflict between the governor and the mayor is pretty interesting
good.
too? Yeah. So that's where there is a split coming, and evidently in New York, the governor can replace the mayor.
Really?
I think that's what I heard. I better double check that. But no, the governor has a final word. Maybe it's suspension or something like that, some detail. But the interesting thing is that two people like that in New York, and Cuomo was pretty strong on saying that de Fazio was
blew it. He messed up.
Yeah, he went overboard.
Well, here's Whitmer, the great governor of Michigan, right? She's the one that shut down. She's the one acting like a tyrant. You can't even buy seeds for your garden. That's unnecessary. Don't you dare. She's the woman, she is the governor who prosecuted the elderly barber that you've talked about, who said, I just want to work. She prosecuted him for cutting someone's hair. And now she says, here's a headline, Gretchen Whitmer encourages areas for peaceful demonstration. Well, the churches are still restricted. And we actually have a clip of her saying this, that I encourage, this is the lockdown governor of all lockdown governors. Let's listen to this clip of her yesterday telling people to go out, demonstrate.
Peaceful protests will absolutely continue, and they should continue, to further the dialogue and to help make sure that we make the meaningful change in our country that we want to see and that we desperately need. And I'll continue.
The protests will absolutely continue, but don't go to church, don't get your hair cut. She actually finally had to backtrack earlier this week because the hypocrisy was too much even for her, and she had to start backing off a little bit on her orders that nobody can open their business. Now a few people can actually open their business.
Well, we have mentioned this several times, but I believe strongly that one of the motivations of those who place all these regulations on, and it is control of people. This whole thing about the vaccines and tracing and following us and all their records and the passports that we'd have to get. So it's more political, more government control. But it's also into it, and you can see it here, there's an anti-Christian, anti-religious attitude about these people because it makes no sense on what they're doing, because it's okay to go out. The size of the group makes no difference if you're on a holy mission. Their holy mission is rioting and stealing, and they justify it too. That's the part that is so hard for people to understand.
It is hard for people to understand, and the media plays a very important role in this. How many months, Dr. Paul, did the media spend attacking people who were resisting this forced house arrest? Oh, you're just selfish. You just want to go get your hair cut. You don't care if people die. You're the worst person on earth. And now all of a sudden they switch on a dime and say, protests, these are great. Get out in the street. This is wonderful. You got to get out there. Let's get thousands and thousands in the street, reporting very positively on it. And it just, we didn't want to say this at first. We had a kind of an inkling that this is, but more and more that we see it, the more that we understand that this is a political move. The entire thing is political. It doesn't say that there's not something underlying. Yes, there was a virus. Yes, there was an absolutely unjust killing of a person in custody. Those are true. But just like in places like Ukraine, where there was, remember, some economic unrest, and that was manipulated to turn into a coup d'etat, I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing some legitimate concerns being manipulated to turn into a coup d'etat.
Yeah, and whether there's one or two or three groups that are all working together, I think it's explainable because I don't think any one group is always monolithic. People get and gather in there for different reasons, but there seems to be a few in the leadership position, that must be coordinating things. This idea that all of a sudden all the bricks they need in the world all arrive about where the demonstrations are going, and obviously they're communicating with each other, and this, of course, is a very serious matter. And the people who are complaining the most now are the ones that seem to be on the defensive. And it's hard to predict how this is going to work out, but I know one thing: the less we do on our side of promoting liberty as a solution rather than authoritarianism, the worse is going to happen, and the longer it's going to last. It's sort of like in the monetary system. If you don't rein in the whole principle of deficits don't matter and printing money doesn't matter, it really will drive our economy into oblivion, which we're on our way to. And these events just make it that much worse. And right now, in the midst of all this, on a foreign policy statement, Daniel, when I see this, and then when I look at our policy and the hatred toward China, not that I love China or anything else, but why do we have to buzz their airplanes in Russia and China? And why do we have to send our ships over there and see if we can bump into one? It's just waiting to start something. It makes no sense at all. That's saying, well, if you don't do that, you're not showing your strength. Yeah. Well, maybe we ought to show a little wisdom. Yeah. That might be more important than just brute strength. And you don't have to be weak to show a little wisdom either. You can be strong and willing to develop your interests. But going that far away from our home to try to stir up trouble, so that's going to be a big issue. And maybe the problems at home will. I've often said that eventually, the foreign policy will end because we're not going to be able to afford it. But right now, I would say the dollar is going to work for a while, as long as there's nothing to compete with it. But I think there will be competition. Eventually, it will be. But why not start right now? If we have to deal with it, why don't we just bring our resources home here and quit trying to start a fight either in Venezuela or Iran or Russia or China? There's no need for that.
Yeah, it's hard to stomach, but there is a sense of of other countries sort of taking some delight in the fact that we're obviously stumbling in the U.S. And I think on your point, it certainly doesn't show. It certainly shows weakness that we believe we can go out and tangle with the Chinese and the Russians. Well, we can't even sort out our own problems at home. We can't even keep people from breaking in and stealing Nikes. But I put together a couple of points, Dr. Paul, and this is from a good piece that Zero Hedge ran, written by Michael Snyder. And it's all about more evidence that the riots are coordinated. And I think this is important. And if I were a person who was going to demonstrate over the police brutality, and we've talked about it on this show for a long time, you've talked about it for 40 years, the problems of police and militarization of police. But if I were a person who was genuinely concerned about that, and I wanted to go make myself heard on that issue, I would be very frustrated and very furious at what's being done in the name of this protest against the killing. But here are a couple of things, just throw them out. And these are all reports that are well linked and well sourced. Reports of chauffeured looters arriving in New York City with specialized tools to break into stores and steal. Then the getaway car comes and they go to the next one. New York Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism. He has observed few things. He's the top counterterrorist person for New York. Organizers pre-placed bail money up and prepared bail money. They put medics in place along the riot routes to be ready to handle the protester. They deployed bicycle scouts to direct the rioters away from cops where they could go without being bothered by cops. And I've actually seen some clips of the bicycle rioters, and actually there's one where he's getting paid by an Antifa guy. The Chicago mayor, of all people, said, quote, "This is an organized event. Minnesota authorities found several caches of flammable materials. They're being transported in cars with stolen plates. And I've seen this elsewhere where they found Molotov cocktails and other almost bombs. More and more stashes of bricks all over, like you pointed out. Kansas City, the police, we didn't want to say this earlier because we thought, the police themselves said, we keep finding bricks. Baltimore police reported bricks delivered. New York, a cache of bricks conveniently in the path of rioters on Sunday night. Dallas and Frisco, Texas, both had bricks. So you're seeing it around and around, and these are now being documented. We've seen this. This is not just a crazy conspiracy theory. So it makes you wonder, really, who is behind this? Will we ever know? I wouldn't mind knowing.
And the other encouragement is that if they catch somebody in an act and they arrest them, and then they are promised, the mayors come out, and I think D.C. has, and others, that they'll not be prosecuted. And it's a reflection of the people who run these very liberal states. You don't get prosecuted for doing this. So this is an outright encouragement to do it because there are no penalties. But then the question is in what they paint this up to be. We like the people who are demonstrating for a just cause, but we have to be careful about the rioting. And I think people obviously have every right in the world to complain about police brutality and all these things, but you can't start participating in the violence. So why is that so hard? Don't you think? I imagine I could convince you. Well, don't you think that if there's a bunch of kids walking around the road and they're demonstrating, they have a sign up and they're not hitting or doing anything, but what if they all of a sudden have a wheelbarrow loads of bricks and they start throwing from a window? Isn't that an act of violence that should be treated quite differently than somebody expressing themselves in public discourse? So there is a point where you can actually figure out when somebody has moved up the ladder on initiation of violence and the aggression that goes on, but it gets ticklish because sometimes it's overwhelming, and when the numbers grow and they can do this, this planning, because 150, 200, 300 people who have a point to make, you have to do some planning to have truckloads of bricks brought in. Yeah. I mean, that's just totally bizarre. But it also then raises the question. We still have a great company. Walter Williams, who I like very much, wrote about in spite of all this, we're still doing pretty good. And he wrote it from a black man's viewpoint. Yeah. Things are pretty good because he compared it to other places. Yeah. But the whole thing is how long is it going to be that way? And things aren't as good as they used to be. But these basic principles have to be understood. And of course, that's why I think the freedom principle of nobody's allowed to initiate aggression, that is where somebody has to start. But the people out here now say that's exactly what you have to do. We have to justify it, and we're not going to penalize it. Go out there and riot if you break a window and steal from the stores. And then now we're starting to see some of these large corporations. I always fear corporate power, corporatism, and government because it leads to corporatism and then fascism. Yeah. But now we have this whole idea. It isn't so much that the corporations want the benefits from it. They have spilled over into the social stuff. Yeah. This social Marxism, and they're making excuses to not even want to penalize them for this. So I think there's a little bit of confusion out there that hopefully someday we can help clarify.
Yeah, the so-called woke companies like Apple are the first ones getting robbed. There you go. I would just close, Dr. Paul, with a sort of an observation. One of my pet things is the media and critiques of the media. And, we saw over the past couple of days, the media went completely nuts when Trump went over to St. John's Episcopal Church with the Bible in his hand. He meant it as a demonstration that we will get through this, even though that 200-year-old church was set on fire by the rioters. It was a symbolic gesture. Obama made a lot of those gestures. He was very good at it. This is Trump's attempt. The media went nuts. They made up a story. It's now come out. They completely made up the story that the Secret Service was putting flashbang grenades and roughing up people to get them out of the way. Totally made up. And it was, so he went there and he held up his Bible. And I just thought, as an observation, Dr. Paul, it's pretty interesting. It says a lot about the media that they're madder at Trump for holding up a Bible than they are at the people who burned down the church in the first place. I mean, what does that say about the values of our mainstream media? But so that's why we do what we do. We try to bring you a different perspective. We try to bring you some new analysis, a different look at things, and hopefully a breath of fresh air. And our numbers are growing. Our subscriptions are growing. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please not only subscribe, but hit notifications so you can be notified when we go live every day. But we thank you very much. If it wasn't for you, it would be just Dr. Paul and I talking to each other, which is very nice, but we also prefer talking to you. So thanks for joining us.
Very good. The problems that we have right now, I think a lot of people would date it from the coronavirus and the reaction to that. And there's a lot in the practical sense that that's when it started. I dated a little earlier that because of the financial problems that have gone on. We have a tradition in this country that we brag about. There has to be separation of church and state, but that doesn't mean the state has to condemn the church and not even permit it voluntarily. As a matter of fact, the First Amendment gives clear protection of this. But the Constitution is pretty good on thou shalt nots. And if the federal government's given permission, then you can do it. But if they don't mention it, that doesn't. If they remain silent, liberals and big government people believe if the Constitution is silent, therefore the government can do whatever they want. Now that is not the case. But since this was developed over a medical problem of coronavirus, a concocted hoax, so to speak, I would like to see the day that people would consider the separation of medicine and the state. It's not in the Constitution, and it's not doing well. We're bankrupt over it, and there's no communist country that ever gave good medical care. And we have some relative freedom, and we still have people coming here. But it's not the way to do it, and especially when it becomes a political weapon. And it's a political weapon when it's free health care, one party payer, and all these things. You bribe people, and then you come along with a virus like this, and they're going to tell us the truth about it. And and science have settled it. They come up with all these rules and regulations and masks and say, science have settled it. They haven't. Science has been terrible on medicine. In my own lifetime, I remember so many things that I had been taught that just wasn't so. And this is something that goes on in it, but it's the connection. It's this assumption that government is responsible. And it's rather new. HEW was started under Eisenhower, and it's grown and grown and grown, and it's gotten terribly bad once we had a Supreme Court justice make sure that we could advance to Obamacare as a right. And look at what's happening now. But the bankruptcy of the medical care system and the bureaucracy of the medical care system is so bad. And now this abuse of using the medical profession to scare people to death. You're all going to die from coronavirus, and it's turning out to be a hoax. Not the virus and the flu and all of this. It's the hoax is really the need for the overreaction, legally and practically and morally. It was way overkill, and it's done a lot of damage, but it all started once the people conceded and thought they were going to get free medical care and it was all going to be perfect, and turn it over to the government. But you can say that about a lot of things, the government does. If the government can take care of us, make us safe and secure and prosperous, and of course you get the exact opposite. So the answers can be found very easily in a philosophy that says nobody can commit aggression against anybody else. You can't hurt other people's property. If we did just a little bit more of that, we'd be a lot better off, because basically that's what most of the great religions have taught. You're not supposed to lie, cheat, steal, and kill. And our Constitution doesn't permit it either. So the answers are there. It's the people who want as a position they take that violence is proper. And that's it. That's the justification for this robbing and killing and rioting. If that is accepted as demonstration and proper, and it supersedes, peaceful demonstration, then we're in big trouble. But I think the people are waking up. More people, when you see these liberal governors and senators switching their tune, and they're racing now to maintain their control by getting a vaccine out, because pretty soon this crisis is going to be over. What are we going to do? Well, maybe we can have another riot going on. We'll instigate something. But anyway, I believe that we will continue to do our best job to present the case for peace and prosperity, and that to me is what our goal ought to be. It's easy to understand. It's part of what the American tradition has been all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.